keep that energy going for our second speaker, James Petersen.
Sorry, I'm standing on the cord.
1968. The makeshift wagon was a scavenger masterpiece. Recycled melon crates, odd-shaped 2x4s, scraps of plywood, 4 wobbly bicycle tires. It was just big enough to hold 3 squealing children being pushed by their older brother on one end and pulled on the other by another friend. I was across the street filming their progress with a Bolex 16mm movie camera. As I panned, suddenly a massive black shape blocked the viewfinder. I looked up. It was a man my size, muscled, bloodshot eyes, sort of leaning back and forth, obviously intoxicated, and he held out his hand. And in the hand was a roll of Tri-X film, 35mm still camera film. 3 months earlier, a community organizer had come to my college fraternity. He was working with South Arsenal neighborhood development. South Arsenal was the poorest neighborhood in Hartford, and he wanted volunteers. Did anyone want to make a movie? He wanted someone to document the conditions in South Arsenal. I volunteered, but since I had never made a movie or touched a movie camera, I had a counteroffer. I would teach kids in the neighborhood photography. I would give them cameras and film and turn them loose, and they would show me how they saw the neighborhood. It worked. My students were teenagers. I gave them cameras and turned them loose, and they did what teenagers today would do. They went immediately down to the playground, photographed their friends playing basketball, their sisters skipping rope or playing hopscotch, their brothers trying to surf on a teeter-totter. They captured joy in its rawest form. But let me remind you, this was 1968. Photography required patience. We would go into the darkroom, develop the film, put negatives into the enlarger, focus the image on paper, and then wait for that magic moment when the image appeared in the developing tray. And then you would hang the photo up to dry. Well, my students wouldn't wait for the photos to dry. They would take wet pictures back to the neighborhood to show their friends, we exist. I also took pictures. I have one of those pictures on my wall. It's been there for 50 years, of a young girl, 4 or 5, sucking her thumb, looking out a window. The curtains are this fabulous fabric of like an English landscape, trees in mist. I can't see into the apartment, it's shadow. I took that photo, and then I would turn around and photograph what she was looking at. Tenements. And over the rooftop, in the distance, the shining, polished downtown Hartford. I looked for contrast, which is why I was photographing the kids in the wagon, because I knew that a little bit further down the sidewalk was Desolation Row, where the out-of-work men and winos sat passing a bottle of sweet wine about. And now one of those men was standing in my face with a roll of film. Had my students lost it? He handed me the roll of film and mumbled something. I had to lean closer. He said, "Would you drive me to see my mother? Would you come see my mother?" In the weeks I had spent in that neighborhood, no one had invited me into their house. So I was willing to drive the few extra blocks. We got in the car, we drove deeper north into Hartford, and pulled up in front of a 3-story Victorian mansion. And in the front was a sign that said something, funeral home. I said, "Does your mother work here?" And he said, "No, they are working on my mother here. We walked into the parlor. My passenger cornered the funeral director and said, "Show him my mother." And the combination of grief and rage was a force. The director took me down a flight of stairs into the basement or ground floor room, and I saw the body of a middle-aged woman under a sheet on a stainless steel table. I heard fluid dripping. There were bottles of embalming fluid, jars of makeup, a pile of clothes that she would wear for her final viewing. And at about that point, my mind stopped working and my heart broke. I had the sense that I was invading something beyond privacy. The director led me back up, and the son came and said, "Did you see my mother?" And I said, "Yes." And I squeezed his shoulder and left. The Day of the Wagon was the last footage that I shot that summer. And I've always wondered why he asked me to bear witness. I was the kid from the college on the hill. But that was the day I finally learned to see.